Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. This video is literally a week late and I apologise for that. Basically it was meant to go up last Friday, but I had this surprise job interview far sooner than I was expecting. And that interview process is still ongoing. It's really drawn out and it's making me pretty busy with it involving numerous tests and stuff like that. But anyway, I wasn't actually going to make this video at all, which may seem amazing for someone with a wargaming channel, especially one that is primarily dedicated to Age of Sigmar. I honestly, just to tell you the truth, wasn't really interested in Shadespire at all at first, and I don't really know why particularly. I just thought, I'm not that interested in an Age of Sigmar boxed game. I love the core game and how it plays, and I guess I just didn't really see a place for a new box game, for me personally at least. And then on top of that, I wasn't bowled over by the core set containing yet more Stormcast and Khorne. Like, don't get me wrong, I love and collect both factions, but 3 more Stormcasts and 5 more Blood Reavers just wasn't really doing it for me. Especially when you consider the fact that I'm not a huge fan of Stormcast models without their helmets, and with this guy, Steelheart, basically being the kind of poster child of the release. I don't know why, but I'm just not a huge fan of this model. Something about him looks a bit too cartoony. I think it's kind of grown on me a little bit since I first saw it, but in all honesty, I'd say the actual sculpt maybe looks better than the art in this case. I don't know, Steelheart is just my least favourite model in the set. On one hand, that doesn't really matter because of how incredible all the other sculpts are. But from another perspective, if you want to take the Stormcast team and you only have 3 models in the first place and one of them doesn't look particularly great, that could be a deal breaker for you. I don't know, what do you guys think? As I said, he has kind of grown on me, but still not particularly my favourite model that's come out of Games Workshop. I guess it all just added up to this set being one that I wasn't that fussed with. I was dismissive, I'll admit that. It can quite often be the case with me that I do that when something new and different comes out and I'm already quite happy with what we've got. So on top of that, there was the fact I was kind of focusing my attention more on Firestorm at the time, which is a pretty cool box for the fact it's pushing the narrative of Age of Sigmar out beyond the Realmgate Wars. Otherwise, I'm probably not too concerned with rushing out to get Firestorm, but this is kind of an aside, but the new cities that are all starting to exist within Age of Sigmar are pretty cool. They're like really doing a great job expanding the narrative, and when my lore series eventually catches up with the present storyline, you can guarantee these cities are going to get mentioned, especially when we know more about them. Back to the matter at hand, I was talking to another wargaming YouTuber and he was like, hey, when are you going to get Shadespire, Kitetsu? And I begrudgingly thought, okay, fine, I will go and look at it properly and see what all the fuss is about, and very quickly my opinion of Shadespire started to change. Now, I think that Shadespire is yet another great thing to have come out of Games Workshop recently, and while they really do need to slow down a little bit, because we are getting bombarded with insanely exciting releases at the moment, with all these new hobby supplies, Necromunda, Firestorm, Shadespire, the expansions for Shadespire, and then it wasn't that long ago we had all of the Primaris and Death Guard launches. Then there's all of these new codexes for 8th edition. Basically there is just a lot going on right now, and it's a great time to be a Warhammer fan. If we look at the last few years, the overhauled models, the start collecting sets, they've all been incredible, and I now think Shadespire kind of sits up there on that kind of level of quality, in my opinion. It serves as a fully playable, excellent introduction to the hobby in general, and just the world of Age of Sigmar. It has its own unique identity that is separate from the main game. It gives you, I guess, a teaser of the full Age of Sigmar experience, because if you are totally new and this is your first box set, you can take the models in the box and you could just use the core Age of Sigmar rules to mess around with and learn the game. You'd have 5 Blood Reavers and you'd have 3 Liberators. It actually gets even better than that, which I'll go into in a moment, but if this is your introduction, then cool, you've got 2 tiny little units that you can, use to learn about the different phases. More importantly, it obviously has its own totally unique game in there too. If you just bought this box set to do a 3v5 Age of Sigmar battle, you are being ripped off, let's face it. For £40, 8 standard models isn't great, no matter how great these sculpts look. If you do want to play the core Age of Sigmar game, then there are way better ways to do it than this set. But it is nice to have just a couple of small units in there that you can use to test out the main game. The bundled game, however, is pretty excellent, and you soon realise that the restricted number of figures works well in its favour. I really do think that Games Workshop have optimised this game and the warband sizes to be exactly right for Shadespire. It's not trying to be the core Age of Sigmar game. It's not about enormous battles. It's about a more personal tale between small groups of individuals. So here's what I'm going to do with this video. I'm going to mention the 5 or so things that I really love about Shadespire. I may have briefly hinted at some of these already, but I will go into a bit more detail with them. So in at number 1, the game has its own lore and setting, which ties it nicely to the overarching Age of Sigmar world. Surprise, surprise, Kitetsu loves the lore. I'm sure you are all shocked. But the setting will probably be familiar to anyone who has played Skirmish. Basically, the name Shadespire comes from the city of the same name, which was once an amazing metropolis in the realm of death. It all went terribly wrong for Shadespire, however, with their discovery of something called shade glass. This miraculous substance basically binds your spirit to it, so you essentially become immortal and remain in some kind of state of existence even after your body should have died. The issue with this is that Nagash is the Lord of Death, and when anybody dies, their soul goes to him. They kind of strengthen him, sustain him, and keep his armies powerful. So if you prevent your soul from going to Nagash, you're only going to anger him basically. And no surprises, he decides he's had enough of Shadespire and its inhabitants, and decides to release a curse on it. He basically traps the city halfway between the realms of light and shadow, and he makes Shadespire an all-round pretty unpleasant place to exist in. He makes the city like a maze where the walls constantly change, so you spend your time going mad, basically trying to find a way out. And then, to spite the occupants, he pretty much gives them their wish exactly, making it so that they won't die, at least naturally, and he traps them there forever. It's kind of like a situation where Nagash is saying, oh, you didn't want to die? Well, very well, that can be arranged, but by the way, you're kind of going to remain in a kind of hell, and if you don't go mad or get massacred by the other inhabitants, then sooner or later you will wish you were dead. So he kind of gives them exactly what they want, but in a really twisted way. Unfortunately, the city itself actually contains heaps of great riches too, like the aforementioned shade glass. So often you get explorers who will willingly enter the city and then they get trapped there. You also get those who are less fortunate and they stumble across the city by complete mistake. Many of those who are trapped there decide that they're just not going to give up searching until they found their way out. Whether or not that is ultimately possible, who knows? Naturally, the confusion, violence and chaos within the city is an ironjawz idea of perfection, so many of those basically decide to enter the city willingly and have no thoughts of escaping. Why would they want to when they can spend an eternity hunting down and killing everything that comes across their path? So that's the basic backstory, and obviously each faction has its own lore as to why it's ended up there, which I think is really cool. Steelheart, for example, is a veteran of many wars. Brightshield was a smith before her reforging, who crafted these incredible weapons, and Oberyn, if I'm saying that correctly, has been reforged 3 times, which has had a detrimental effect on his personality. The Reavers also have a great backstory. I particularly liked Carsus, who was once a slave. He now wears the chains that he basically used to choke his old masters to death. And just look at how good the sculpts are for the Reavers. They really do look incredible. We've also got the Death Rattle and Ironjawz warbands, which will be available separately. Also have some super cool backgrounds to them. Maybe less so for the Death Rattle, but I did love the idea of the Warden, who was the previous Grand Marshal of Shadespire, and he basically still serves Nagash to make sure that no one gets too comfortable in the city, basically. I like the fact that the game board is split into 2 reversible halves, and every game you basically set them up totally differently, and that reflects the way the city is constantly shifting and changing. So that's another cool thing they've done with it. On to the second thing I really love. The game is easy to learn but hard to master. The actual game is pretty straightforward. I was concerned when I first started looking at Shadespire that it would be too complex and that I would have to learn too many new rules. It's basically an entirely new game from the core Age of Sigmar. I just wasn't particularly feeling that. I've learnt how to play Age of Sigmar and 40k, and I was thinking that's probably enough for me, especially with all the complexity of the war scrolls with Age of Sigmar and the fact I collect far too many armies as it is. Obviously it goes without saying that the more you collect the more rules there are to learn, but the gist of Shadespire actually took me minutes to grasp. I don't want to do a lengthy tutorial on how to play the game because there's already a lot of that out there as it is, but basically you each have a warband, you set them up on your respective halves of the board on the starting points, and then each round you can do 4 things, whether it's move or attack or guard, and you and your opponent take it in turns to carry out those 4 actions. So you might go first and expend an action on moving, then it's my go to do an action, and so on and so forth until we have each spent 4 actions. The core set gives you an enormous range of tokens that you can use to keep track of everything you do, whether it's knowing how many actions you've taken so far, who's moved, who's attacked already. It's simple, it's effective, it's really great. The idea of the game is basically that you capture objectives, kill your opponent's models, or complete other conditions that can be written on objective cards that you draw. There is of course more to it than that, but for an entirely new battle and turn system, it's remarkably simple, it has a good flow to it, and you get this more appealing complexity from a kind of strategic perspective with the cards, and they really keep things mixed up in the game. I also like the fact you never have to manage too many cards in one go, so you can very much learn to play as you go along. The cards allow you to upgrade your fighters, do various tricks or maneuvers that outplay your opponents and stuff like that, so they're really cool. You also have your objective cards, which give you opportunities to score points for completing those specific objectives. Every time you play, you will end up playing a completely different game to the one before and the one afterwards. It kind of reminds me a lot of the excellent open war cards that Games Workshop released, but this game goes a step further and gives you a far greater range of objectives for each faction to carry out. The way you play your cards and the tactics you employ throughout the game makes things strategically rich. Knowing whether to place characters next to each other so that they can support one another, or whether to risk attacking when guarding is perhaps the safer option, it can make for some tense games. One last point I want to make on the game being simplified: I'm a huge fan of the board being basically grid based. Unlike in normal Age of Sigmar, in Shadespire there are no complex situations of measuring movement or attack ranges. No one can ever argue that you moved a model too far, or you can't get into any disagreements over whether your attack is actually out of range, or that a charge distance is too far for you to make. The system here is just solid, it's foolproof, and I feel like they could make maybe a great video game out of this system too, maybe for like phones or something. That would be really good. This brings me on to the third thing that I really like about Shadespire. As I mentioned before, the warbands in the game are pretty small, which makes the game flow so much better. It makes every decision count so much more. Your characters are not expendable if you only have 3 of them, and even if you have like the Khorne side, for example, and you're playing the Stormcasts, your individual models are weaker than the Stormcast, so if you lose a couple of them but your opponent remains at full strength, that can be potentially devastating. What that also means is the games won't go on for too long, and I'm a big fan of that, especially being as busy as I am recently. It's also partly why I love 1000 point Age of Sigmar games. You can fit them in easier, they never really become tedious, and they just have a really good pacing to them. And that's pretty much what you have here, exactly, is that good pacing, and it just works really well, I think. Mostly that is due to you having the smaller warbands, rather than tens or hundreds of models, to be honest. The last game that I played a 40k recently was against a guy who was just so slow at choosing his psychic abilities and knowing his stat lines, and the game just kind of dragged, where he spent half of it flicking through his index and his codex, and that just is not the case with this game at all. Everything you need to know at a glance is right in front of you at all times, and after a few games you will just be playing it really smoothly. So the fourth thing I really love about the game, and this links in with the previous point, is that the size of the warbands not only streamlines the game and speeds it up, it also makes the game start to become more personal. You start to look at your unit as a collection of individuals, rather than as just generic, faceless fighters. In the lore of Age of Sigmar, and fantasy before that, and even in 40k, that's precisely what you have. Each unit is like a band of brothers, working together, trusting one another, going through hell and back, whilst always looking out for each other. So I'm a huge fan of this narrative driven approach in Shadespire. Every model is a unique character, with just enough hint of a backstory to make them stand out from one another, and I think this mindset makes me look differently at my own Age of Sigmar armies. Now, I'm going to admit that I have a very good imagination, but Shadespire makes me transfer this idea of every model being a unique individual into Age of Sigmar. Not that I'd want all of my liberators to have completely different rules from one another, I really wouldn't want that at all because the game would become a horrendous mess of complexity, but from a narrative perspective, it's nice to imagine that these units are just made up of a collection of real individuals with their own backstories. I have said this already, but something I really want to change with Age of Sigmar is that it needs more characters and heroes. More named individuals with their own identity and background, and To be honest, that is precisely what we are getting in this box set. Because if you go onto the Games Workshop website, they have actually created unique war scrolls and are going to do so for every warband that they release. That's amazing. They've basically made these characters fully playable with your core Age of Sigmar game and with your current armies. This means that if you buy the Iron Skulls warband, for example, you've got yourself an immediate 4 characters that you can spice up your Ironjawz army with. Suddenly your Khorne army gets an extra 5 characters and so on. They're not necessarily powerful, you know, typically you are looking at a kind of just above average battle line unit, but I just think it's great to add a bit of diversity to your battle lines in the army. The sculpts are also fantastic and unique, so you can even just mix them into your standard units just to give them a bit of extra visual flair, which I'm a big fan of. Another thing I personally love, as a bit of an aside, and I don't want this video to turn into some commentary on political correctness, but it's the fact that the female Stormcast has been included. It's great, in my opinion, to see a little bit of gender diversity in Warhammer. I know Games Workshop are listening to the fans and that more female models are on the way, but in all honesty, I think in future it would be great to see box sets released with a mixture of male and female options just thrown in as standard. Wouldn't it be awesome if Liberator sets just released like this? Obviously with alternative sculpts, but just a mixture of males and females subtly put together. I don't think it has to be totally in your face. Like, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you can't even look at your army anymore without thinking that Games Workshop is sending you a message about political correctness or gender equality or something like that. But I do think it's cool, and I'm a fan of this approach. I may end up talking about this topic more in the future. It's somewhere on my list of things to talk about among the many other things I want to talk about, so who knows when that will be. Lastly, because I am late talking about Shadespire, Games Workshop have announced that the expansion packs are £17.50, and I was expecting Games Workshop to pitch these higher, probably closer to the £20 mark, so I'm really excited about these. I guess you need to invest in the starter set to be able to use these kits to their full potential, or if you're part of a group of friends who wants to play, then at least someone needs to cough up for it, unless you will chip in. But even so, for £17.50 you get 60 cards, and then on top of that you get the warband too. If we look at other card based games like Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, a structure deck of only 45 cards is easily going to cost you up to £15 in the UK, maybe even more. So for 60 cards and the 4 to 7 detailed and brilliantly sculptured models you get here, I think these are priced perfectly, and I am super happy with that. And if you look at the website where I buy all of my Warhammer from, they are selling these things at just over £13, so great stuff basically. So, to sum up my opinion of Shadespire in some closing words, I think the game is really fun and tactical. It's easy to learn, but has enough strategy involved to keep it interesting, and with the options for customizing your decks and randomized card draws, randomized board setup, the game is going to have some longevity. On top of that, it has a nice background story, which I'm a big fan of. The core set contains a bucket load of counters to make the game easy to keep track of. The price point is great. It's only £30 online, which is really great value for money. And the expansion warbands are perfectly priced in my opinion too. And you can use all of your figures in the standard Age of Sigmar game, thanks to the War Scrolls that Games Workshop are releasing. So I know that by now we know a few of the warbands that are coming out. Let's just hope we get a good range of them to basically represent as many people's favourite factions as possible. They did show the Skaven recently too, and I think they look super cool. Might be a bit biased because I love Skaven, but hey. But yeah, let me know below what your thoughts are on Shadespire. Let me know if you want to get it or you've already got it. Also, let me know which faction you like the look of so far and which ones you hope to see release for it. I guess I'd be interested to know as well whether you prefer the look of Shadespire or Necromunda, because for some people that's possibly going to be, you know, the decision they have to make soon. Obviously Necromunda is a lot more expensive and it's a very different type of game, but they're both equally viable and interesting options in their own right. So that's probably all I really need to say on Shadespire for now. Thank you all for watching and for all of the incredible support I have been getting. I was, in all honesty, blown away when I got to 50 subscribers, and now I'm well over 1,000. I don't really know what to think, to be honest, so seriously, just thank you all so much, and I will see you guys soon.